Today we'll take a look at a short-lived, obscure motion sensing game from SEGA? It's called Pods, and it's basically a motion detecting take on the classic memory game, Simon. When SEGA released it in 1994, they called Pods the futuristic game of light and sounds. It wasn't a bad tagline. The game consists of 3 pods, which all have upper and lower lights. Plus, the game has a lot of sound effects. Maybe too many. And it's definitely futuristic, not just because the technology was fairly cutting edge. This game actually looks ahead of its time. The design has a sort of modernistic Jetsons feel. The pods look like cartoony alien spacecrafts. Pods didn't stick around for too long. It could have been that consumers saw pods as a battery-draining gimmick. The $50 price tag could have scared people off too. There's also the theory that Pods is too similar to the popular handheld game Simon, which became a pop culture fixture in the 70s and 80s and retailed for around half the price of Pods. But whether Pods was too unique or not unique enough, or just too pricey, it's a somewhat rare game made by one of the most popular video game companies of the 90s. So let's take a look at Pods, the futuristic game of light and sounds. Pods is essentially a system which can play 7 games at either a beginner or pro level. The games test the player's memory and sometimes their reflexes. Most of the games are for 1 player, but there are 2 multiplayer games as well. This game is truly motion activated. Each pod senses motion from 1 to 12 inches away. Everything you do, including adjusting the volume, is done using motion control. There's just one exception to that rule, the on-off button at the back of the master pod. When you turn it on, the game lights up and sounds off. Pods allows you to adjust the difficulty by choosing either beginner or pro mode. There's a key written on the master pod if you want to quickly select a pro game. For the beginner games, you have to listen to the menu.
Game 2. Game 3.
Each pod has 2 sets of light, an upper light and a lower light. In the beginner games, only the upper light is activated. But in the pro games, the pods sense where a player's hand is located within the 1 to 12 inch range of detection. So to activate the lower light, you place your hand between 1 and 6 inches of the pod. To activate the upper light, you place your hand between 6 and 12 inches of the pod. It's a pretty cool feature when it works. On my system, both the right and left pods had trouble gauging my hand height. The system was so wonky that it made the games pretty much impossible to play in the pro mode. But even in the beginner mode, you also have to be careful about your hand placement. It's easier if you separate the pods so as to minimize interference. The game recommends using a quick karate chop motion, which I found works best. So, what about the games? Overall, they're not great. There are 7 games total, but the first one is basically just practice mode, where you get used to using the sensors. Games 2 through 4 are called Lightning 1, Lightning 2, and Lightning 3, and this is where the game seems the most like the popular memory game Simon. In each of these games, Pods plays a pattern, and the player must accurately reenact it. Each version of Lightning is more difficult than the previous, because the sequence gets longer. In Lightning 2, you're given 15 pod moves to replicate. In Lightning 3, you get 20. There's nothing wrong with that, but it did make me wonder why they didn't just make one Lightning game that gets longer as you go and then tells you the high score at the end. Also, even though this is a blatant Simon knockoff, it's not quite as fun as Simon. Since the game's sensors aren't accurate enough in pro mode, I played in beginner mode. With only 3 sensors, the game isn't quite as challenging as Simon. Game 5 is called Add a Beat, and it's the first of the 2 multiplayer games. In this game, you and another player build a beat that other person has to repeat. You take turns adding a beat to the sequence. The first person to miss a beat loses. For me, this is easily Pod's best game. It gets pretty competitive and challenging too. Game 6, called Speedo, tests your reflexes. It's kind of like whack-a-mole. You have to put your hand over the light beam before it turns off. If you don't make it in time, or if you put your hand over the wrong pod, you lose. The final game is called Color Tag. In this game, up to 6 people can play. Each player chooses a color or a pod, and then when their color or pod lights up, they have to quickly break the pod's beam. The game gets faster as it goes. I actually thought this game would be pretty fun, but it is kinda lame. Color Tag isn't very challenging, and getting more than 2 people to sit comfortably around SEGA Pods is kinda difficult. That's because Pods is a fairly small game. Even when you spread out the pods as far as possible, they're still pretty close together. I can't imagine 6 people actually wanting to crowd around this thing. And of course, throughout the games, there are a ton of sound effects. There are sound effects when you do well, when you do badly, when you turn the game on. In fact, each pod has its own special sound effect. If the game gets too noisy, you can always turn the volume down by holding your hands for 3 seconds over all 3 pods. And that seems like a neat feature at first. See, Pods has just 2 volumes. It's normal volume, which is very loud, and the lower volume. Anytime you reset the game, which happens pretty often when you're playing Pods, the volume jumps back up to the default mode. It's pretty annoying. I'm sure the designers thought it would be cool to use motion sensors to control just about every aspect of this game, but Pods would be much better if there was a volume dial in the back. You can power Pods using 6 AA batteries, but you'll have a much better experience using an AC adapter. The Sega Game Gear adapter works perfectly. In fact, they probably should have included an AC adapter with the game. According to the manual, using an AC adapter lets you play longer, with brighter lights, and also allows 2 pods to light up at the same time. Additionally, each of the 3 pods is powered by 2 bulbs, which you may need to replace from time to time. When the game first came out, replacing the bulbs wasn't much of a hassle. They used the same bulbs as most mid-90s flashlights. But these days, those PR12 bulbs aren't sold in most stores. I had to order mine online. So, that's Pods. Is it a must-have? Not at all. Pods just isn't that fun. The technology is too wonky to play in pro mode, so it's basically a less challenging version of Simon. It's more of a novelty than a truly fun game. I can see why some people might play this a few times, then let it collect dust on a shelf. Having said that, for hardcore Sega fans, this is a fun collector's item. It's a quirky, futuristic game that not a lot of people have heard of, and it was put out by one of the biggest video game companies of the 90s. That's all for this episode of The Gaming Historian. Thanks for watching.
Funding for Gaming Historian is provided in part by supporters on Patreon. Thank you.